The Last Stand. In the midst of an alien wasteland, where the skies were no longer blue and the ground was scared by the remnants of a violent struggle, a single figure stood. The land stretched endlessly, cracked and barren, as if the very earth had been ravaged by the horrors that had come from the stars. Jagged rock faces loomed high, casting long shadows over the scorched valley floor, where shattered remnants of metal and broken bodies lay strewn about. This was a place where hope had long been extinguished, and yet, in the heart of this desolation, Amanda Farrow stood resolute, staring down her enemies. Before her, two towering alien war machines loomed like nightmares made flesh, their sleek, metallic forms glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. They were massive, each one easily over 7 feet tall, humanoid in shape, but entirely alien in design. Their armor was made of an unknown alloy that shimmered with a ghostly blue glow, as if alive with energy. In their hands, they carried weapons that seemed far too large for human combat. Cannons capable of leveling cities, yet they stood there, unyielding, like mechanical sentinels. Amanda's breath came in short, shallow bursts. Her pulse raced as her grip tightened around the black communicator, blood staining the small device. Her torn shirt clung to her bloodied skin, and her face was smeared with dirt and the remnants of the brutal encounter she had just survived. She was nearly 8 months pregnant, but there was no time for fear or concern for her own life. Her thoughts were with the child she carried, and the man she loved. "You should have left us alone," Amanda spat, her voice trembling with a fury that matched the storm brewing inside her. She was angry, not just for herself, but for every life these creatures had taken. Her fists were clenched by her sides, and though her body trembled, her resolve was unshakable. She had one mission now: survive, and protect her unborn child. As she gazed into the glowing slits of their visors, she couldn't help but feel a surge of defiance. These creatures, these Clarins, had no understanding of what they had unleashed. They might have destroyed her ship, killed her friends, and taken everything from her, but they had underestimated humanity. And now, she would make them pay. The communicator crackled, the static-filled voice of her husband, Marcus, breaking through the noise. "Amanda," it came through faintly, but clearly. "ETA 23 minutes. She closed her eyes and let out a deep, shaky breath. 23 minutes. She could hold on for that long. She dropped the communicator to the ground, her fingers numb from the cold. The Clarins were still watching her, their silent observation like the predatory gaze of a hunter toying with its prey. She had no weapon, nothing but her wits and her will to survive. She turned her body, slowly, keeping her eyes locked on the towering machines as she took a step back. The Clarins had arrived, seeking resources from the human colonies, wiping out anyone they considered a threat. And yet there was something different about this moment. Amanda knew this was the end of one chapter, the end of her suffering, and possibly the beginning of something far greater. The wind picked up, sending dust swirling around her, as though nature itself was conspiring with her resolve. She glanced toward the horizon, the distant hum of engines cutting through the still air. Her husband, Marcus, was coming for her. He wouldn't let her die here. He couldn't. The thought brought a bitter smile to her lips. She had always believed that love was the one thing that would survive anything, even in the harshest of circumstances. And now, in this forsaken place, that love was all that mattered. Marcus would come. And when he did, the Clarins would regret the day they ever crossed paths with humanity. The echo of war. The clatter of metal echoed through the narrow corridors of the Reliant, the once proud colony ship now reduced to a skeleton of its former self. Inside, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of quiet anticipation and unspoken fears. Amanda Farrow sat on the edge of a makeshift cot, her hands gently cradling the curve of her swollen belly. The soft hum of the ship's failing engines vibrated beneath her, a constant reminder of the fragile hope that had carried them this far. The Reliant was more than just a ship now. It was a lifeline, a fleeting dream of safety in a universe that had long forgotten the meaning of peace. Though Amanda's body was heavy with the weight of impending motherhood, her mind was restless. The war with the Clarens had taken everything from her: her home, her family, her peace. But it hadn't taken her will to survive. She had fought for her life, for the life growing inside her. And now, after months of fleeing from one battleground to another, they were almost there, almost to sanctuary, a place promised to be untouched by the endless conflict that had ravaged humanity's colonies. But peace was an illusion, one that was about to be shattered. Amanda's hand instinctively brushed the smooth surface of her communicator, a small black device that had become her only connection to the world outside. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining what sanctuary might be like, a planet untouched by war, where her child could grow up without knowing the horrors she had witnessed. Her moment of quiet reflection was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside their quarters. The door slid open, and there stood Marcus Farrow, her husband, once a decorated Marine, now the embodiment of a man broken by war, but still standing. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, and his piercing gaze softened when it landed on her. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, but even that seemed like a fleeting thing, like a memory trying to hold on in the face of everything they had lost. "You're up early," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper that carried the weight of exhaustion and concern. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on Amanda's belly before they met hers. "I told you to rest." Amanda shot him a tired smile, though it was tempered by the unspoken worries they both carried. "Hard to rest when the kids are practicing gymnastics in here," she said, her voice teasing, but there was a strain beneath it. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm, the comfort of his touch grounding her in the chaos of their reality. Marcus chuckled, though it didn't reach his eyes. He crossed the room in 2 swift strides, kneeling beside her. His calloused hand rested gently on her stomach, a soft gesture that held more meaning than words ever could. "Maybe they're just getting ready," he murmured, his voice laced with quiet optimism. "Pharaoh kids are fighters." For a moment, there was peace, a fleeting illusion, yes, but a peace nonetheless. The world outside their cramped quarters was full of danger, uncertainty, and bloodshed, but here, in this small moment, they were just a family. Amanda had fought for this fleeting sense of normalcy in the face of overwhelming odds. "We're almost there," Marcus continued, his voice softening. "Another 2 days, and we'll reach sanctuary. No more fighting. No more running." Amanda's heart swelled at the thought, but there was a shadow in her chest, a gnawing fear that even sanctuary might not be enough to protect them. She could see it in his eyes, too, the unspoken doubt, the uncertainty that lingered just beneath the surface. It wasn't just the war, the Clarens, or the endless struggle for survival that weighed on them. It was the thought of bringing a child into a world like this, a world where hope was a luxury that only the lucky few could afford. "Promise me, Marcus," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "no matter what happens, we protect the baby." Marcus's jaw tightened. There was no hesitation in his voice when he spoke next. "You have my word." But just as quickly as the peace had come, it shattered. The ship's alarm blared to life, its shrill cry cutting through the stillness like a blade. Amanda's heart stopped as the sound reverberated through her chest, every instinct telling her that something was terribly wrong. Marcus was already on his feet, his rifle in hand, moving swiftly toward the door. He didn't need to say a word. He knew the threat. Amanda's breath caught in her throat as a muffled thump reverberated through the walls, followed by the horrific screech of tearing metal. Her body tensed, every muscle coiled in fear, but she remained rooted in place. The Clarens had found them. "Stay here," Marcus ordered, his voice a low growl as he glanced over his shoulder, his expression hardening. "No," Amanda said, her voice firm despite the fear that clawed at her chest. "I'm coming with you." Marcus gave her a look that brooked no argument, but Amanda was already moving, her feet carrying her toward the door before she could second-guess herself. They had no time to argue. There was no more time to waste. As the door slid open, the distant sounds of combat reached Amanda's ears. Gunfire, the heavy thud of boots, the crackle of alien voices speaking in tongues she couldn't understand. And then the unmistakable screech of metal being torn apart. The Clarens were here, and they weren't leaving without a fight. Marcus had warned her of this. The Clarens were precision hunters, their technology superior to anything humanity had ever seen. They would stop at nothing to wipe out the remnants of humanity, to leave nothing but ruin in their wake. But Amanda wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She wasn't just fighting for her survival. She was fighting for the future of her child. And that was something worth every ounce of strength she had left. A collision of fates. The deafening alarm blared through the corridors of the Reliant, its shrill cry punctuating the chaos that had suddenly erupted on the ship. Amanda's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted down the narrow hallway, her breath coming in frantic bursts. Every step felt like an eternity, but there was no turning back. She had to keep moving, had to find Marcus, had to make sure their child survived whatever storm was coming. Behind her, the sounds of battle rage, the heavy clang of metal against metal, the sharp crackle of weapons discharging, the guttural roars of alien soldiers. The Clarens had breached the ship. The entire vessel was under attack, and she knew that Marcus was in the thick of it, fighting not just for their lives, but for every last shred of hope humanity had left. The walls of the Reliant groaned under the strain, the metal vibrating as though the ship itself was screaming in agony. The hull had already been breached in several places, and the air was thick with the smell of burning wires and melted metal. Amanda's hands shook, but her resolve was firm. The future of her child depended on surviving this moment, this attack, and nothing would stop her from reaching Marcus. "Where are you?" she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of violence that surrounded her. Her fingers wrapped around the communicator, but the connection was lost in the static, the signal too weak to reach anyone outside the ship. The communicator was nothing but a useless piece of technology now, another casualty of the attack. As she turned a corner, she nearly collided with a figure, a soldier in combat armor. Her heart skipped a beat before she realized it wasn't one of the Clarens. It was Marcus. For a split second, the chaos seemed to recede, and in that moment, she saw him. Marcus, standing at the end of the hallway, his rifle slung across his back, his eyes wild with determination. His once perfect military uniform was now torn, dirtied, and stained with blood. The sight of him, alive, filled her with a surge of relief, but that feeling was short-lived. There was no time for celebration. Not yet. "Amanda," Marcus shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. He didn't wait for her to respond before grabbing her by the arm and pulling her toward him. "We need to get to the escape pods now. The Clarens are tearing through the ship. There's no time to waste." She nodded, her breath ragged, her mind racing. "What about the others? What about?" "They're gone," Marcus interrupted, his tone grim. "We're the only ones left. Now move." Amanda didn't question him. She didn't have to. She could see it in his eyes, the weight of everything that had happened, the crushing loss that hung over him like a shadow. The Reliant was done for, and their only chance of survival was to escape before the ship was completely destroyed. The two of them moved in sync, their steps fast and purposeful as they navigated the crumbling ship. The halls were narrow, cramped, and filled with debris from the damage the ship had sustained. Sparks flew from broken wires, lighting up the darkness like tiny stars in the void. The ship groaned under the pressure of the ongoing battle, its metal frame rattling as though it were on the verge of collapse. Amanda's mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The Clarens had been relentless, their superior technology easily overpowering the feeble defenses the ship had left. They had come for resources, for supplies, but now it seemed they had no intention of leaving anyone alive. Humanity had underestimated them. She had underestimated them. "Where's the baby?" Marcus asked, his eyes flicking down to her swollen belly as they turned another corner. The protective instinct in his voice was unmistakable, and Amanda placed a hand over her stomach, reassuring herself, and him, that her child was still safe. "I'm fine," she whispered, though the truth of it gnawed at her. She had no idea what was happening outside the narrow confines of this ship, whether the world beyond would even be safe if they escaped. She had never felt so powerless. But the sight of Marcus beside her, his determination a quiet but unshakable force, filled her with strength. He was her rock, the anchor that kept her from losing herself to fear. She could do this. They could do this. Ahead, the escape pods came into view, small, sleek, and lifeless. A part of Amanda felt a pang of sorrow at the thought of leaving the ship behind, but another part of her knew that survival came first. There would be no time for mourning, not yet. The future of humanity could wait. The future of their child could not. Just as they reached the pod entrance, a familiar, chilling sound stopped them in their tracks. The low, rumbling hum of an alien voice, distorted and garbled through the ship's damaged comm system. It was the Clarens, and they were close. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Get to the pod now. I'll cover you." Amanda didn't hesitate. She climbed into the pod without another word, the hatch sliding shut behind her with a hiss of air. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she strapped herself into the seat, her hands trembling with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Outside, Marcus stood, rifle in hand, his back to the pod as he faced the incoming threat. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice breaking, but there was no answer. The pod systems came online with a soft peep, and she saw Marcus through the small viewing window as he turned to face the advancing alien soldiers. She could see the resolve in his stance, the last remnants of the soldier he once was. The pod's thrusters roared to life, and as the ship's hull shuddered one last time, the escape pod shot away from the crumbling vessel. The Reliant, their home, their sanctuary, faded into the distance, leaving behind the chaos and destruction that had consumed it. In that moment, as the vast emptiness of space stretched out before her, Amanda could only hold on to the faint hope that this escape would lead them to something better. But deep in her gut, she knew this was just the beginning. The Clarens would not stop until humanity was gone. And Marcus knew that too. Their fight was far from over. The aftermath. The escape pod rocketed away from the disintegrating hull of the Reliant, its small, fragile frame hurtling through the cold, infinite void. Amanda sat in silence, her eyes locked on the small window as the ship they had called home disappeared into the distance. The flickering lights of the pod cast sharp shadows on her face, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on the destruction they had just left behind, on the people they had lost, and on the future that now seemed so uncertain. Marcus was beside her, his posture rigid, his face unreadable as he worked the controls. The pod's engines hummed softly, its movements smooth as it navigated the vast emptiness of space. But the calmness of the moment only made the weight of what had happened feel heavier. The ship was gone. The crew was gone. The Reliant had been their last hope, and now it was nothing more than debris scattered across a distant galaxy. Amanda's hand instinctively moved to her stomach, her unborn child still safe, still kicking. She took a deep breath, her mind struggling to push away the dread that had settled in her chest. The baby was the one constant she could hold on to, the one thing in a universe that was suddenly full of unknowns. But even the thought of her child, her future, couldn't shield her from the brutal reality they now faced. "What happens now?" Amanda finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She hadn't meant to break the silence, but the question had been weighing on her since they escaped. They had no ship, no home, and no allies, just the two of them, drifting through space with nothing but the stars as witnesses. Marcus's eyes flicked briefly to her before returning to the controls. "We survive," he said, his voice low and steady. "We survive, and we find a way to fight back." Amanda felt the sharp edge of his words, but there was no softness in his tone, no room for doubt. Marcus had always been a soldier, But now his drive was focused on something even more powerful: revenge. They had lost everything: their home, their families, and their sense of safety. And now, with nothing left but each other, it was clear that the only way forward was through the same resilience that had kept them alive all these years. "We're not alone," Marcus continued, his gaze fixed on the void beyond. "There are other survivors. We got to find them. And when we do, we fight back. We take the fight to the Clarence." The thought of facing the Clarence again, of engaging in yet another battle with the technologically superior alien race, sent a chill down Amanda's spine. But at the same time, it sparked something deep within her. They had already taken so much from humanity, from her. The thought of letting them win was unbearable. "You think there's a chance?" Amanda asked, her voice breaking through the hum of the engines. She was tired, so very tired, and the weight of their loss felt unbearable. But there was something in Marcus's eyes that made her believe. Maybe it was the soldier in him, or maybe it was the man who had fought for her, for their child. Whatever it was, she saw a spark, a tiny flicker of hope. "There's always a chance," he said simply. "As long as we're alive, there's always a chance." The silence between them stretched on, the stars outside the pod's window their only company. Time seemed to slow, each second hanging in the air like a fragile thread. The vastness of space felt infinite, like an unbroken abyss that could swallow them whole. Yet despite it all, Amanda couldn't help but think that the void was just another obstacle to overcome. She had seen the worst of humanity, the worst of the universe. But she had also seen the strength that could be born from it. Her fingers tightened around the seat. They were alive. They had survived. And that meant they still had a fighting chance. Hours passed in silence, the quiet hum of the pod's engines their only companion. In that time, Amanda tried to push the dread from her mind, trying to focus instead on the small, flickering hope that she could feel building within her. The escape from the Reliant had been the beginning of something new, a new fight, a new challenge. But it also meant they had a chance to rebuild. The pod's systems chimed, and Marcus's hand moved quickly to check the navigation console. His eyes narrowed as he adjusted their course, his fingers flying over the controls. "There," he said, pointing to a glowing dot on the display. It was a planet, small, uncharted, and sitting on the edge of a nearby star system. A potential sanctuary, if only for a brief moment. Amanda looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. It was not the peaceful haven they had dreamed of, but it was something they could use. "That's where we're headed," Marcus said, his voice full of purpose. "We need to rest, reassess, and if we're lucky, maybe we can find allies there." She nodded, though doubt lingered in the back of her mind. She had seen the brutality of the Clarence firsthand, the way they had torn through human colonies without hesitation. But if there was any chance of regrouping, of finding survivors who had fought back and survived, she knew this planet was their best shot. The escape pod veered toward the distant world, the engine's quiet hum carrying them across the cosmos. In the dark expanse of space, as the stars stretched out endlessly before them, Amanda held on to the flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the place where humanity could take its first step toward recovery. But as the planet grew larger on the display, a chill ran down her spine. She could feel it, the presence of something unknown, something waiting. The Clarence might have thought they had won, but as long as she and Marcus were alive, they hadn't. The fight was far from over. The hidden threat. The planet loomed larger as the escape pod descended, its surface bathed in the dim light of a distant star. From the outside, it seemed like an unassuming world, a speck of rock in the vastness of space, with sparse clouds drifting over its jagged, mountainous terrain. Yet there was something in the air, something Amanda couldn't quite place. As the pod descended, she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, a strange tension in the atmosphere that made her skin prickle. Inside the pod, Marcus remained focused, his hands steady as they gripped the controls. His eyes flicked to the planet below, then to Amanda, who sat across from him, her face a mix of exhaustion and determination. The child growing inside her had been kicking relentlessly for the past few hours, as if sensing the uncertainty of the situation. But despite the discomfort, Amanda couldn't help but feel a faint hope creeping in. This planet, with its untapped resources and unknown possibilities, could be the respite they so desperately needed. "We should land near the mountains," Marcus said, his voice steady but tinged with an edge of caution. "There's a cave system there, natural shelter in case the Clarens are nearby." Amanda nodded without hesitation. She trusted his judgment. He had survived countless battles, and his instincts had kept them both alive so far. The pod's engines hummed as they adjusted their course, angling toward the rocky peaks rising in the distance. As the pod skimmed closer to the planet's surface, Amanda couldn't shake the sense of unease that gnawed at her. The closer they got to the ground, the more the strange tension in the air seemed to grow. The landscape, though barren, felt eerily quiet. No sign of any native life, no movement on the ground, just an unsettling stillness that settled in the pit of her stomach. "We're getting close," Marcus muttered, eyes narrowing as he adjusted the pod's speed. The terrain below grew clearer with every passing second, and Amanda's unease deepened. There was something off about this place, something she couldn't explain. The pod finally touched down with a soft thud, the ground beneath them shaking only slightly as the landing gear made contact. A sense of finality settled over Amanda as the engines powered down, and the eerie silence of the planet enveloped them. Outside, the world appeared barren and untouched, the mountains looming like ancient sentinels. Marcus quickly unstrapped himself from the pilot's seat, his movements swift and efficient. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice urgent. "Let's move." Amanda followed suit, pushing aside her growing sense of dread and focusing on the immediate task at hand. The pod's hatch opened with a hiss, revealing the desolate world outside. A dry, cold wind swept in, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and something else, something metallic, almost unnatural. She couldn't place it, but it made her skin crawl. They stepped outside, the sharp, craggy landscape stretching out before them. The mountains, towering in the distance, seemed to beckon them with their promise of shelter. Marcus set a brisk pace toward the base of the nearest peak, his rifle at the ready. Amanda kept close behind, her hand instinctively resting on her belly as she navigated the uneven terrain. She kept her eyes darting to every shadow, every craggy outcrop, expecting something, or someone, to appear at any moment. They hadn't traveled far when Marcus suddenly stopped, his posture tense, his rifle raised. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Amanda froze, straining her ears. For a moment, all she could hear was the wind whistling through the cracks in the rocks. But then it came again, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The low hum of engines, cutting through the silence like a predator closing in on its prey. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "It's them," he muttered, his voice grim. "The Clarens." Amanda's heart sank. She had hoped they would have a moment of peace, just enough time to catch their breath, to regroup. But it seemed that the Clarens were already here, and they were not going to let up. "How many?" Amanda asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know," Marcus replied, scanning the horizon with his sharp eyes. "But we need to move. Fast." The urgency in his voice jolted Amanda into motion. She followed him, her pace quickening as they approached the base of the mountains. There had to be shelter up ahead, something to keep them hidden, something to buy them time. But the closer they got to the rocky outcrop, the more Amanda felt the air grow heavier, thicker with the strange tension that had been building since their arrival. As they reached the foot of the mountain, Marcus signaled for Amanda to stay low. They crouched behind a large rock formation, taking cover. The hum of the engines grew louder, and Amanda's pulse quickened. She could feel the ground vibrating beneath her feet, the telltale signs that something massive was approaching. She clenched her fists, her mind racing. Whatever was coming, they had to be ready. There would be no escaping this fight, no way to run from the storm that was about to descend on them. And then, just as they were about to move, something else caught Amanda's eye. A flicker of movement, not from the Clarence, but from within the mountains. Something was there. Something hidden in the shadows. It was then that she realized there was more to this planet than met the eye. More than just an uninhabited world. More than just a hiding place for a wounded humanity. There was something here, something ancient, something that had been waiting in the dark corners of the mountains for someone to stumble upon it. And Amanda had a sinking feeling that their arrival was no accident. They had landed on this world for a reason. But what that reason was, she couldn't yet understand. The calm before the storm had ended. Now, they were about to uncover a truth that would change everything. The awakening. The moment the strange hum reverberated through the rocky crags, Amanda's breath caught in her throat. The sound wasn't just the distant rumble of Clarence engines. This was something deeper, something far older. It pulsed through the ground beneath their feet, vibrating the air around them. The mountains themselves seemed to groan in response, as though they were alive, stretching toward the sky in protest. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he crouched beside her, his rifle held low but ready. The two of them remained still, hidden behind the jagged stone formations, as they tried to make sense of the ominous noise. "You feel that?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the unsettling hum. Amanda nodded, her fingers tight around her belly, as if the pulse of the planet itself was somehow tied to the child within her. "It's not just the Clarence," she said, her voice tinged with unease. "Something else is happening." The hum grew louder, more intense, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. It wasn't the slow rumble of an approaching ship or the pounding of alien boots. This was something far more ancient, a force that seemed to resonate with the very heart of the planet. Marcus didn't need to say a word. He grabbed her arm and pulled her up, his grip firm but urgent. "We need to move. Now." They scrambled up the rocky terrain, Marcus leading the way as they navigated the narrow path that wound through the mountain's base. The air felt thick, heavier with each step, as if the atmosphere itself was charged with static. Every instinct Amanda had screamed at her to turn back, to run from whatever was awakening deep within the mountains. But there was no turning back now. The Clarence were coming, and whatever was below the surface was about to rise. Amanda could feel the weight of it. An ancient, dormant force stirring, something that could shift the balance of the entire conflict. As they rounded a bend, a sudden flash of light caught their attention. Far ahead, the mouth of a massive cave loomed, its entrance framed by towering stone pillars that jutted from the ground like the bones of some ancient creature. The light was coming from within, flickering in rapid bursts, as though something was being activated. It pulsed rhythmically, in sync with the hum that was now almost deafening. "It's coming from there," Marcus said, his voice low and intense. "We need to see what's inside." Amanda's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear and curiosity fighting for dominance. Whatever lay beyond that cave entrance, it was no coincidence they had been drawn here. She could feel it in her bones. The cave was calling to them. They approached cautiously, the heavy silence broken only by the distant thrum of the mysterious energy. As they reached the cave's threshold, Amanda hesitated, glancing back at the path they had taken. The Clarence were close, no doubt, but the pull of the unknown inside the cave was undeniable. It felt like destiny, like the very fabric of the universe was weaving them into a story far greater than they could imagine. Marcus turned to her, his gaze unreadable. "Stay close. No matter what happens, don't go in alone." With a final nod, Amanda followed him into the darkness, the light from the cave's entrance casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward them like tendrils. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of ancient stone and something metallic, like rust. As they moved deeper, the rhythmic hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls, until it felt as if the ground itself was alive. The cave opened into a vast chamber, and Amanda's breath caught in her throat as her eyes took in the sight before her. At the center of the cavern was a massive structure, half buried in rock and dirt, yet somehow untouched by the ravages of time. Its surface shimmered with an otherworldly light, its shape both alien and familiar, an intricate web of metal, stone, and energy, as though it had been built by hands not of this world, and yet had been here for eons, waiting to be uncovered. "What is it?" Amanda whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I don't know," Marcus murmured, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting something to leap from the shadows. "But whatever it is, it's not just a ruin." They stepped closer, and as they did, the hum began to intensify. The structure before them seemed to pulse with life, its energy now cascading through the chamber, illuminating the walls in flashes of brilliant blue and white. Then, without warning, a low, metallic groan echoed through the cavern. The massive structure shifted, its walls vibrating as if awakening from a deep slumber. The light from within grew blinding, and Amanda had to shield her eyes as a sharp burst of energy shot from the core of the structure. The ground beneath them shook violently, throwing them off balance. Amanda stumbled, but Marcus caught her arm, steadying her as the chamber seemed to come alive with motion. The air crackled with energy, and Amanda's heart raced as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just some long-forgotten alien relic. It was a weapon, or something more powerful, something that had been waiting for the right moment to activate. The hum became a roar, deafening in its intensity. The light surged, and for a fleeting moment, Amanda saw something in the center of the structure, something that made her blood run cold. It was a massive chamber, filled with intricate machinery and something living. But before she could make sense of it, the vision blurred, and a flash of light consumed everything around her. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The chamber was silent. The hum was gone. The energy had dissipated, leaving only the echo of its passing. Amanda's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, and her mind raced to comprehend what had just occurred. The alien structure had activated, awakened, and now she felt a shift in the air around her. It wasn't just a weapon. It was something much older, much more dangerous, and it was connected to the fate of this planet. Before she could speak, Marcus grabbed her arm again, his face a mask of urgency. "We need to go. Now." As they turned to leave, Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that what had just been unleashed in the depths of the mountain wasn't just an ancient force. It was the key to everything. To their survival. To the war they were about to face. And whatever it was, the Clarens would stop at nothing to control it.